People talk glibly about science. What is science? People coming out of a university with a master's degree or a PhD, you take them into the field, and they literally don't believe anything unless there's a peer-reviewed paper. It's the only thing they accept. And you say to them, but let's observe, let's think, let's discuss. They don't do it. It's just, is it in a peer-reviewed paper or not? That's their view of science. I think it's pathetic. Gone into universities as bright young people. They come out of them brain dead, not even knowing what science means. They think it means peer-reviewed papers, etc. No, that's academia. And if a paper is peer-reviewed, it means everybody thought the same, therefore they approved it. An unintended consequence is that when new knowledge emerges, new scientific insights, they can never, ever be peer-reviewed. So we're blocking all new advances in science that are big advances. If you look at the breakthroughs in science, almost always they don't come from the center of that profession. They come from the fringe. The finest candle makers in the world couldn't even think of electric lights. They don't come from within. They often come from outside the breaks. We're going to kill ourselves because of stupidity.
It never ceases to amaze me what seemingly innocuous ideas the establishment media find dangerous or controversial. Netflix recently released an 8-part documentary series titled Ancient Apocalypse, where Graham Hancock, who has been a household name for alternative archaeology since the release of his book, Fingerprints of the Gods, in 1995, introduces us to his central theory that human civilization is considerably older than current archaeological orthodoxy believes, but that most evidence for this was wiped out by a colossal natural disaster around 12,000 years ago. He supports this theory with physical evidence for such a natural disaster, curious geological anomalies, and seemingly ancient megalithic structures. He points out that the mainstream view of prehistory insists civilization did not and has never existed before the year 4000 BC, but that recent discoveries such as the Temple of Göbekli Tepe, which dates back to 9600 BC, call that mainstream view into question. He also collates mythic stories and old legends from around the world that all reference some massive global catastrophe. Floods, earthquakes, giant snakes in the sky, strange visitors from across the sea, etc. And then emphasizes their many eerie similarities. Through the collation of this research, Hancock then asks some questions of the mainstream view of our ancient history and posits a theory of his own, that we are a species with amnesia, who have forgotten our own past. These are not new ideas solely from Hancock's imagination. Immanuel Velikovsky said something very similar half a century ago. In fact, his last book, published posthumously, was titled Mankind in Amnesia and explored the psychological impact of us as a species repressing the memories and forgetting the stories that echo from a distant, traumatized past. These questions might sound intriguing to you, or you may be indifferent to them, or you may even vehemently disagree with them. But I bet you didn't know they were racist, did you? That's right, racist. Don't believe me, you goddamn conspiracy theorist? Just ask The Guardian. Yes, the Grawn has spoiled us with not just one hit piece, but two, all in the space of 1 week. Robin McKee writes his from an archaeological standpoint, while Stuart Heritage speaks as an entertainment critic. However, one is very much like the other. They both agree the Netflix series is wholly unacceptable. All of it. These are dangerous ideas that shouldn't be allowed. McKee alleges Hancock's claims reinforce white supremacist ideas, because questioning the age of human civilization
strips indigenous people of their rich heritage and instead gives credit to aliens or white people.
McKee further explains,
Then there were the Nazis. Many swore by the idea that a white Nordic superior race, people of the purest blood, had come from Atlantis. As a result, Himmler set up an SS unit, the Ahnenerbe, or Bureau of Ancestral Heritage, in 1935, to find out where people from Atlantis had ended up after the deluge had destroyed their homeland.
There we have it, you see. The idea of Atlantis is inherently racist because the Nazis believed in it. The fact Hancock never mentions race or white people, or aliens for that matter, in the series, nor, to the best of my knowledge, in any of his books, makes no difference to this. So, what are you going to do now? Keep researching the Atlantis myth? Like a Nazi would? Of course, going by that logic, we should really do away with Christianity as well. God, in general, in fact. Perhaps we should cancel Volkswagen and Wagner too. Nazis also brushed their teeth and wore shoes, I believe, neither of which shall I be taking part in from this day onwards, just to be sure. So, there we have it. Ancient Apocalypse is racist, even though it never mentions race. The remainder of their twin critiques are no better argued or supported by reality. Here is a typical example of the intellectual level we're working on here.
For a story that was first told 2,300 years ago, the myth of Atlantis has demonstrated a remarkable persistence over the millennia. Originally outlined by Plato, the tale of the rise of a great ancient civilization followed by its cataclysmic destruction has since generated myriad interpretations.
It was this opening paragraph alone that prompted my response, as it is so uniquely meaningless. What does he mean by, for a story 2,500 years old has demonstrated remarkable persistence, as opposed to what? All those other stories that we don't know about? How is that measurable, exactly? Besides, we have a plethora of stories and mythologies dating back 2,500 years, and even much further into the past than that, including all the Greco-Roman myths, plays by Sophocles and Aesop's fables. We have detailed legends and lore passed down from ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. The Old Testament fits the bill as well. And, of course, Homer's Iliad, which describes the fabled Trojan War. Let us remember that the city of Troy was also believed to have been just a myth until we discovered that it wasn't. And I'm sure before 1870, when it was first discovered, that there was no shortage of academics decrying the search for Troy as a heretical waste of time.
What is the essential attraction of the tale? For answers, we only have to look at the works of Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, H.P. Lovecraft, Conan Doyle, Brecht, and a host of science fiction writers who have all found the myth an irresistible inspiration.
Simplicity itself. The reason Atlantis is so popular is because it's so popular. Robin then asserts as fact that Plato intended the tale of Atlantis to be little more than an allegory. There is no way of knowing that, of course. He merely asserts it and then goes into a gish gallop.
As to the likely site of the original Atlantis, the serious money goes on the destruction of the Greek island of Santorini and its impact on Crete, and puts the blame on volcanic eruptions, not errant comets, as Hancock argues.
Should we not give credit where credit is due and assume that Plato and Solon, from whom Plato got the story, and the dynastic Egyptians from whom Solon got the story, most likely knew the difference between inside the Mediterranean and outside the Mediterranean? If they place Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Hercules, should we not at least consider it possible that this is indeed where the original Atlantis was? I invite readers to listen to Plato's accounting yourselves and see what you make of it. Here is an unabridged and well-produced reading. The history of Santorini's volcanic eruption was probably, by contrast, relatively well known. Santorini didn't actually sink, after all, as Atlantis is said to have done. It's still there. The ancient Greeks called it Thera, and they were perfectly well aware of its existence. It shares no cultural, historical, or technological similarities to Plato's description of Atlantis at all, short of being an island. But none of that bothers McKee, who at this point, and without ceremony, just sort of stops writing. Job done. Atlantis debunked. What's for lunch? Moving on to Stuart Heritage's piece, which is thankfully briefer but in no way less smug, in his subheading he boldly asks,
"Why has this been allowed?"
Allowed? I'm not sure what authority he's calling on here. Netflix execs? Local, national, or perhaps global government? Or maybe it's rhetorical, and he's beseeching the Lord God himself how such evil could come into the world. Beyond this, Stuart seems even less interested in debunking or debating these dangerous ideas than McKee was, and far more focused on analysing and ridiculing its presumed target audience. Fortunately, Stuart, with his view unbiased and his mind wide open, has discerned exactly who that is in the first 5 minutes, because he saw, or thinks he saw, Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson flash up in the pre-show reel. Joe Rogan appears in one quick interview, which is used in the first episode and the last. John Peterson, however, does not appear in this documentary at all. And I'm really not sure why Stuart thought he did. Perhaps he just didn't watch closely enough to realise this before rushing his 500 words off to be published in one of the largest news outlets in the world. More notably, when Heritage later amended the change, he just removed the Jordan Peterson reference, and neither he nor the editors or the subeds even bothered to correct the syntax.
Fortunately, you don't have to watch for long to find out. In quick succession during the pre-show sizzle reel, we are treated to a clip of the show's host Graham Hancock being interviewed by Joe Rogan.
In quick succession, we see one clip. The laziness is staggering.
This article was amended on 27th of November 2022 to remove an incorrect statement that the pre-show reel includes a clip of Graham Hancock being interviewed by Jordan Peterson. The interview in question was by a different person.
Just a different person now. It's not important who anymore. He's not on the Guardian's naughty list. Equally strangely, both McKee and Heritage seem to think Ancient Apocalypse makes claims of super-intelligent beings and aliens when it simply does not. Hancock's argument, whether you accept it or not, is that human beings were more advanced than academia admits. Not robots, but flying cars, not aliens, but more advanced humans than we currently give them credit for. And he cites evidence for this, which both Stewart and Robin ignore in favour of critiquing Hancock for things he does not say. They cite no sources and debate no actual claims. They use buzzwords and identity politics in place of analysis, and between the two of them they couldn't fill one page of A4. It is as if they and their editors had no faith or interest in what they were actually doing. Although Stewart does rather give the game away in his closing statement.
That's the danger of a show like this. It whispers to the conspiracy theorist in all of us, and Hancock is such a compelling host that he's bound to create a few more in his wake. Believing that ultra-intelligent creatures help to build the pyramids is one thing, but where does it end? Believing that election fraud is real, believing 9/11 was an inside job, worse.
I mean, he's got me stumped there, because for the life of me, I literally can't think of anything worse than believing in election fraud, which is obviously as fanciful as believing in the Loch Ness Monster. What next? Believing in tax evasion? Presumably he's referring to the 2020 US election, because The Guardian has claimed fraud is very real in some elections like Russia, Syria, Bolivia, Brazil, Libya, Afghanistan, Iran, Venezuela, to name but a few. And they were pretty darn adamant that it was Russian collusion that got Trump into office in 2016. Does that not count? Stuart Fruit presumably believes election fraud is only a conspiracy theory when it happens here, in the West. Either Bat Dog believes it has never happened, ever in the whole history of the world, or perhaps he's simply typing up any old nonsense just to get that word count a little higher. Sense and consistency be damned. Who's to say? However, the fragile honesty underlying this is quite telling. He is essentially saying, if people become skeptical of one thing, they may become skeptical of another, which is to be expected, but what I can't understand is how anybody could think that's a bad thing. People should be skeptical. People should ask questions, and they should expect answers, especially from those who profess to know them. One should be open-minded and always pursue the truth. And to better decipher what that may be, we need people sharing new ideas, questioning the mainstream view, and challenging the established narrative as new evidence presents itself. We need that. Science, progress, and discovery all depend on it. Even if the ideas turn out to be false, prove them false. In short, no one should be the gatekeepers of history, least of all those who laud their certitude in the face of the unknowable. The mystery is exciting, the evidence is compelling, the series is engaging. Even if none of it turns out to be true, the questions are still worth asking. These ideas are only dangerous if you fear what they question, and those who fear questions fear the truth. Thank you for listening. I am a fantasy author, designer, and illustrator. If you'd like to help support my projects, you can find my fantasy work here. Also, a big thank you to my faithful supporters across Patreon and PayPal. If you'd like to become part of this small but growing community, be sure to subscribe, click the little bell, and check out my first book, The Farmer and the Fold, available on paper and Pixel on Amazon. Thanks again.